Okay, for those of you who are not in class today, we're going to go ahead and try to get through these notes in 4 minutes or less. So I'm going to go through this beginning stuff really quickly. The bottom line with all this language here is that you need to know that these three right triangles here are all similar. So the smallest one, C, A, D. The next largest one, C, D, B. And the largest triangle are all similar. So you can see there's similarity statements to the right over there. We're not going to go ahead and get into how all these match up, but you can see that the proportions are made there. Now, with this larger triangle, you see that we're going to name some of these parts. Most of these parts are in reference to the largest triangle, ABC. So the ABC has two legs, it has a hypotenuse, it has two parts to the hypotenuse, and an altitude. On the proportions below, you can see that we wrote in, instead of the name of the segments, we wrote in the name of the part. So I have leg over part 2, hypotenuse over leg. When I cross multiply, I get leg squared equals the hypotenuse times part 2. On the other side, part 1 over the altitude over part 2. When I cross multiply, I get the altitude squared is equal to the product of part 1 and part 2. So that's going to give us two general formulas. If you're looking for one of the legs of the largest triangle, you're going to do the near part times the square root of the near part times the hypotenuse. Since there are two parts, we have to be specific. We labeled them as 1 and 2 at the top, but really you're looking for the part that is touching that leg. So I'm just going to call it the near part. And then you go over here. If I'm looking for the altitude of the large right triangle, then I do the square root of the part 1 times part 2. I didn't designate them as such inside the radical because we're multiplying them together, so the order that you multiply them doesn't really matter. So let's take a look at how we use that to solve the lengths of any right triangle. For this first example, I'm trying to find a part and I'm given the altitude, so I'm going to use the altitude formula, and the setup is pretty simple. I just do the altitude, which is 4, is equal to the square root of part times part, which is x times 8, which would give me 8x. Now to solve this, we're just going to square both sides. So when I square both sides, that just gets rid of the radical. Notice that I don't do anything with the 8x. And then I just use some algebra to divide by both sides by 8, and my answer here is going to be 2. If we drop down to example 3, you're going to see that 2 root 10 is a leg, so I either have the leg or I'm looking for the leg. In this case, I have it, so I'm going to use that leg formula, so it's going to be the square root of the near part times the hypotenuse. And this is what it looks like. I got to remember that the whole hypotenuse is x plus 3. The near part is x and not 3. I'm going to go ahead, square both sides, then I'm going to distribute. I'm going to have to do some factoring to solve, so I'm going to take a second here and see what happens. Okay, so here's my work. See that I had to factor. I ended up with my answers as 5 and -8. My distance can't be negative, so the answer here is just x equals 5. Okay, quick last word here about the geometric mean. The geometric mean of two positive numbers is the positive square root of their product. So as you see in this little box over here, that's going to be x is equal to the square root of a times b, or x squared is equal to a times b, where a and b are positive numbers. So example number 2 is pretty good here. So I do 5 times 16. Now this one I actually ended up with I was multiplying by a perfect square, so it probably would have just been easier to call this 4 root 5. So for the purposes of the homework and the quizzes and the tests, all we want this in is the form of a simplified radical. Now you're ready to do worksheet 3. I know that was quick, but hopefully you have enough to try and attempt those problems and work through some of those things. Thanks for listening.